Anna, would you like to introduce what we are doing today?
Sure. I want to apologize. I'm having technical issues with my computer, so I'm not able to, share some things I wanted to share. But I wanted to start just by acknowledging that we're in Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homelands of the Kalapuya people. And following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya people were forcibly removed from their homelands by the U.S. government and taken to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. So today, Kalapuya descendants are primarily citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. Also, following the protocols of Indigenous diplomacy, I also want to recognize the 9 federally recognized tribes, including the Burns Paiute tribe, the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Susla Indians, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the tribes of Siletz, the tribes of the Umatilla, and Warm Springs and the Coquille Indian tribe, as well as the Coe Creek Band of Umpqua tribes and the Klamath tribes, and also federally unrecognized tribes, in particular the Chinook people. So I wanted to just say thank you, Ruhi. I had approached Ruhi several months ago about a seed prayer that was taking place in Native communities on July 5th that basically I had convened as part of a longer trajectory of work that I do in Native communities. We had, and this is what I wanted to show you, so maybe I can share this with folks later. Basically, we were able to convene what is called a seed prayer across the entire continent of America. So we had folks in Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, Bolivia, Costa Rica, Mexico, the Caribbean, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, Cuba. We had folks in Hawaii, and we had folks from Florida, New York, Texas, Pennsylvania, and several of the tribal members here in Oregon participating in this convening. And the call was basically, given the pandemic and given everything that we've lived through in this year, to think about what it means to have our seeds for the next 7 generations. And if we think about it, our seeds are what enable, well, in a Native worldview, right, seeds are what enable life to continue along with water. And so the idea of setting an intention, of coming together, of basically in the different ways that different tribal communities and different indigenous communities pray, each community being different, as well as, Afro-descendant communities, the different ways of praying, the different ways of setting an intention for seeds to survive for the next generation. We approached that date, the July 5th, which was a significant date in Native calendars. And we collectively, in different ways, honored and prayed for the seed to continue. So I had originally approached Ruhi, as someone who's Native and Black, but also Jewish, I had talked and approached Ruhi and said, what does this look like in Jewish community? Would this be something that TBI would be interested in participating in? The intention is not to impose a single way, but rather for each community to, in its own way, figure out its relationship to seeds and honor seeds from now and into the future. And so as we were talking, the idea of having a study session during Sukkot emerged. And so that's what we're here to do today. And I want to acknowledge any other Native Jews who are in the space, Native American Jews who are in the space. There are quite a few of us, and we're always walking those lines between our relationship to our indigenous communities and our relationship to our Jewish communities, and thinking does it mean to bring those two together? Where are places of encounter and places of solidarity and deep love and commitment in the support for each other, and thinking about what does it mean to imagine Jewish community and Jewish life and our seeds, right, ancestral seeds, 7 generations into the future. So that's my introduction, Ruhia, if you want to take it from there.
Sure. Thank you, Anna. I am so honored to have been invited to do this with you. I want to give a little bit of context for the text we will be diving into, and a little bit of context for why we will be diving into a text. When Anna first approached me, she was very clear that she was not asking, that she was interested in each community that participates in this seed prayer process, participating in its own ritualized form. And so as we were talking about what that means, I realized, at least in my mind, that the most quintessential Jewish ritual, though we often think of it as prayer, is actually Torah study, and is the process of chevruta, of engaging a text together in a small group, in a community, and wrestling meaning out of it. We were talking about the relationship between the ritual that Anna crafted and the time of year. And as we talked, her seed prayer wound up occurring right before Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, and the 3 weeks, which is a time not of hope in the Jewish tradition, but of actually great existential anxiety and grief. And we discerned that actually the time that combines our existential anxiety about what might be in the future, along with our hope for good in the future and for future generations, is Sukkot. Every day of this holiday of Sukkot, those of us who do the traditional rituals, we are actually taking up our lulav and etrog. We're taking up these plants and waving them around, and literally calling, Anna, save us, God. We are calling out prayers to bring down the rain, prayers for well-being of future harvests. So I couldn't imagine, although since advertising this event to colleagues, I've received some feedback about like, well, why didn't you do it at this other time of year? I couldn't imagine a better time to engage in a ritual that is focused on generativity of seeds for future generations. And in conversation with Anna, that is what we came to. So hence, here we are today. I'm so delighted, as I said earlier, that we have indigenous Jews, we have rabbis, we have, I didn't say this earlier, we have Tevaniks, my fellow trained Jewish environmental educators who are joining from all over the world. And we have members of TBI right here in Eugene, which is so delightful. So the text we are going to be looking at today is a variant on a midrash that appears in the Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit. Its more famous form is in the Talmud in Masechet Ta'anit, but we are going to be looking at a version that appears in Yalkut Shimoni, which is a medieval compendium of midrash, a collection of texts of stories and teachings that are ordered as a commentary on the Tanakh, on the Hebrew Bible. And so this story is about a famous character known as Choni Hama'agal, Choni the circle maker, and an encounter he has with seeds and planting. And as we get into this study, we'll see how this relates to exile, which I think is very important, particularly for a Jewish group in conversation with an indigenous ritual, to acknowledge that our recent experience, recent as in the past 2,000 years, has been of being an exile people, and we have some very ambivalent relationships with indigeneity and even the idea of indigeneity. So this text touches on exile and this question of generativity. What does it mean to continue to plant seeds, to hope for a future, to accept a future in times of change, which I think is a very live question for all of us right now, certainly. So as happens in all sorts of classes, I'm gonna give you the text that you can engage on your own, at your own pace. I'm gonna type it into the chat. I'm gonna type a link into the chat that you can follow at your own pace. If I can copy and paste it. Sorry, it's taken me a minute. Okay, so I know this is a garbled bunch of text, but if you click on this link, it should take you to a PDF of our text study. Maybe you can show me a thumbs up if that's working for you. I will also screen share this text so that if you're looking on a device that doesn't allow you easy access to the chat, you'll be looking at it in a moment. Can folks who are here on a computer open this link in the chat? Oh, it says we have to sign into Microsoft. Okay, I'm sorry.
Ruhi, you can share the screen.
Yeah, I will. I do want people to be able to access it on their own time. I will screen share to start. Jody, can you email Dan and ask if he can prepare a document that will be openable by other people? And if he is able to prepare a link that other people can open. In the meantime, I will, yes, share my screen. Thank you for your patience. So. Here we are, and let's start out. If you are so inclined, and if you haven't already prayed this morning, you're welcome to join me in the blessing for Torah study, the mitzvah formula followed by la'asok b'divrei Torah, to engage. We give thanks for the mitzvah of engaging with words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Before we get into this base text, every midrash, it hooks onto a line from Tanakh, from the Hebrew Bible, and this is the line that the midrash we're studying is going to hook onto. It's going to open with this verse, and it's going to close with this verse. And as we'll see, this verse is very much about exile and longing and redemption. So if you are accustomed to praying the blessing after eating, Birkat Hamazon, you'll be familiar with this verse. It's the first verse of Shir Hamalot, which is the song sung at the beginning of the blessing after eating on Shabbat and holidays. Shir Hamalot, Beshuv Adonai et Shivat Zion Hayinu Kecholmin, a song of ascents. And then I really wrestled with this translation because tense in biblical Hebrew is often very ambiguous. So we could read it as when Hashem restored us returning to Zion, or those returning to Zion, we were like dreamers. Or we could read it as when Hashem will restore us returning to Zion, we will be like dreamers. And it goes on, this psalm of longing for this redemptive return to the Jewish homeland, to this rebuilding of the Holy Temple. So this midrash opens. Would someone like to read so that it's not just me and Anna doing all the talking? You're welcome to unmute yourself. I'm going to scroll down. Any volunteer? Thank you, Sabina.
Okay. A song of ascents. When Hashem restored us, returning to Zion, Rabbi Yochanan said, all the days of the life of that righteous man, Honi was distressed over the meaning of this verse. He said to himself, is there really a person who can sleep and dream for 70 years? One day, he was walking along the road when he saw a certain man planting a carob tree. Honi said to him, this tree, after how many years will it bear fruit? The man said to him, "It will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed." Honi said to him, "Is it obvious to you that you will live 70 years?" He said to him, "I found a world full of carob trees, just as my ancestors planted for me. I too am planting for my descendants."
So let's pause there, Sabina. Thank you for reading. And let's just note what there is to notice about the text. Anna, I want to invite you back into conversation because we had a conversation about this earlier and would love to have you start off sharing what came to your mind about this text in our initial study.
So I think some of the things I thought about, well, and keep in mind, like my thoughts have changed after Kol Nidre and the conversation on Teshuvah, right? But just thinking about the encounter with a carob tree, why the carob tree, you know, why the significance of that, this concept of how many years will it bear fruit, the idea of continuity, right? The kind of, when we plant a seed, the kind of, I don't know if faith is the right word, but the kind of understanding that that seed may or may not produce new fruit, right? There's this questioning, this tree, after how many years will it bear fruit? And the man said to him, "It will not produce fruit until 70 years have passed." It just makes me think about the longevity and the ways in which one single seed and one plant contains within it the marking of time. It contains within it like the understanding that we must be patient, that we must surrender in a way to that process of the seed, and that we don't actually know if it will bear fruit. Like we don't know if something will come of it. It's planted there, right? We encounter it. We hope that it reproduces. We hope that it creates some life and that there's some sort of continuity. And it does require, and when I read this, you know, thinking about surrender, and then when I think about it in, you know, in relationship to the ways in which, you know, we've been asked to think about teshuvah and justice, racial justice, I think about what are the trees we are encountering now, and what are the kinds of fruits we are expecting or hoping for over the next generations, 70 years, right? The next 70 years that will pass. So I do think it's a fair question that Honi asks, which is it obvious to you that you will live 70 years? We don't know, right? We don't know. So those are my beginning thoughts.
And it's in some ways the question of anybody working for any kind of vision of the future that looks different from today. Will I live to see it? Will you live to see it? And what's the point of doing the work if you won't live to see it? And I realized I didn't go into the number 70 because Honi's initial question, is it possible to sleep and dream for 70 years? So the first exile of the Jewish people between the destruction of the first temple and the restoration is 70 years. So that is the tie of Honi's question about this verse to his encounter with this person planting a carob tree. Now, it is not clear, and as we will see later in the text, it will be extremely confusing, if Honi is living before the destruction of the temple and is having and knows the prophecy that it will last 70 years, where the text takes us later actually points in that direction, or the more sort of rational scenario, which is that the exile and return already occurred and that he knew that already happened. But Honi's asking this question: what does it mean? Can it be that someone could sleep and dream for 70 years? And now he's encountering someone planting a carob tree, which according to Jewish tradition, which takes a very long time to bear fruit, doesn't actually take 70 years, but placeholding in this story is taking 70 years, and saying, I'm going to do this even though I don't assume I will live to see it. Now, let's also note that a carob tree in Jewish tradition is magic. it appears also in a very famous midrash about Shimon Bar Yochai that appears in the Talmud Masechet Shabbat, page 33. For various reasons, Shimon Bar Yochai has to hide out from the Roman authorities for 12 years in a cave, and he is sustained, he and his son, by a miraculous carob tree. Now, I am not sure if this midrash is meaning that the carob tree is that carob is so nourishing, or if part of the miracle is that a fruit as like, kind of dusty and astringent and not nourishing as a carob tree could sustain Shimon Bar Yochai. I don't know about any of you, but like my only relationship with carob, my primary relationship with carob is like being disappointed when I accidentally eat a carob chip cookie thinking that it's a chocolate chip cookie. So like it wouldn't be my first choice as something to plant or sustain me for 12 years. But like there is this like magical mystique about it. It appears here, it appears with Shimon Bar Yochai. It points to like the possibility of miracles. Before we go on, Anna has talked and I have talked. I want to take a minute and see if anyone else has a reflection or a small enough group about this text that you feel like the rest of the group absolutely should hear before we move on.
Can I say something?
Please.
So I think it's Havel that has this quote, that hope isn't something that you do because you know what the outcome that will be. It is something that it's actions that you take because you believe in something and you are willing to work for that vision, whether or not you know that it is going to happen in the end. So that when you were taught that idea of 70 years and not knowing if you'll ever be able to eat from that tree is not really the point. It also, what came to me is more of a Buddhist ideology of karma, and how these actions that we might take for the future, planting the seeds for the future, I do believe that there is intrinsic value in doing that, that in those actions, it does enrich your life and something does bloom inside that is its own type of fruit.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, if anyone, I've been really in this past year in a very intense relationship with Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark, a small book that she wrote. And it's all about this sort of like the hope as a commitment that we make, a motivating commitment, and not something that guarantees any particular result. So, okay, so here's Honi. He has encountered this person. He's a little incredulous maybe about why you would plant a carob tree when you are not going to be around to see it bear fruit. We don't see him answer the man's point. We don't know if he buys it or if he's, still a little skeptical. And then let's go to Honi sat and ate bread. Sabina, would you like to keep reading?
Sure.
We're right here.
Sleep. Okay. Yeah. Honi sat and ate bread. Sleep overcame him, and he slept. A cliff formed around him, and he disappeared from sight and slept for 70 years. When he awoke, he saw a certain man gathering carobs from that tree. Honi said to him, "Are you the one who planted this tree?" The man said to him, "I am his son's son." Honi said to him, "I can learn from this that I have slept for 70 years, and indeed he saw that his donkey had sired several herds." Shall I keep it? Or we stop?
Well, we'll pause here and let's just notice Honi's eyes are beginning to be opened, like he's able to perceive that he has slept for 70 years. He's able to perceive that from the evidence of the natural world. We've had this big, strange miracle. And often, let's admit, like if this story is being told on Tu B'Shvat to children, it's going to end either here or at the point where we paused before, Sabina, right? Where the man says, just as I planted or just as I found carob trees and my ancestors planted for me, I plant for my children. It's like a very sweet, satisfying ending. Like, oh, look, there is a carob tree. Oh, it's good to plant for the children. Let's see what happens next.
Honi went home and said to the members of the household, "Is the son of Honi HaMe'agel alive?" They said to him, "His son is not. His son's son is." He said to them, "I am Honi HaMe'agel." They did not believe him. He went to the study hall where he heard the sages say about one scholar, "His halachot are as enlightening and as clear as in the years of Honi HaMe'agel." For when Honi HaMe'agel would enter the study hall, he would solve for the sages any difficulty they had. Honi said to them, "I am he," but they did not believe him and did not pay him proper respect. Honi became very upset, prayed for mercy, and his soul rested. Thus people say, either friends like Job's friends or death.
Thank you, Sabina. And by the way, this last line is where the story starts to diverge from the story in the Talmud. The Talmudic version says either o chevruta o metuta, either chevruta, a friendship, like intimate study relationship, or death. Here, it's even like a little more diggy, like even friends like Job's friends, who are famous examples of not great friends in Torah, in Tanakh, even those are preferable, or death. So Honi, like, what do we see here? What do we make of this turn of the story? Well, I have some things to point out. Honi, and don't worry, this is not the end of the story. We're pausing here, but the reason that we're using this version, the version in the Talmud ends with that line, either chevruta or death, but this version in Yalkut Shimoni goes on with a lot more. So I'm just checking someone has written something in the chat. Okay, we're good. So Honi finds himself completely disoriented and by his new reality and unable to accommodate himself to the change. He wakes up after 70 years. He is able to perceive that time has passed, and he goes back to his old life, looking for the markers of his own life, hoping to find his family as he remembered it, as he left them, hoping to be recognized by him. And his first great tragedy and tragic disappointment is that that is not possible. He goes to the study hall, hoping to find his colleagues as he left them, hoping to be honored as the colleague that he was. And his second great tragedy is that that is also not possible. And he is not able to find a place in this new reality. A carob tree can blossom after 70 years of this transformation, but 70 years of transformation is too much for this Honi, as it would probably be for most of us. And so the most merciful thing that can happen to him is that he dies. He is not able to inhabit this new reality, which, by the way, we have, going back to the opening text that this midrash is based on, leaves the question, his question kind of standing. What does it mean to sleep for 70 years? Would we really want to sleep for 70 years and then return and then be restored to the place we came from? The implicit answer, if we pause at this point in the story, is no. This would be terrible. I'm going to pause and check the chat because it seems like people are offering some comments there. Yes, thank you, Maram. the man who planted the seed is remembered by his family. Honi's seeds have borne fruit in another way, but he's not acknowledged and there's no place for him. Great. Does anyone else want to make a comment before we look at the...
This is Meryl. Yes, I'd like to make a comment. I'm a geriatric chaplain, and we lost a woman who I had been her chaplain for like 18 years, and very, very forward-looking person. She was over 100 when she passed, and she always said that she would like to go to sleep and wake up, you know, in another generation. And I just think it's a particular kind of personality that would be like that could plop themselves down in a new place and build relationships. But what I see, this is about relationships for Honi. And for whatever reason, he is not able to do that, to recognize his grandchildren and maybe his great-grandchildren as being able to start anew with. But I just want to put that in there, that I think it is a particular way of viewing life.
Absolutely. And that's like a really great segue, thank you, Meryl, to the second half of this text, because we're going to see another Honi HaMe'agel who has the same experience and is able to assimilate it really differently. So, so the Yalkut, there's been a break in the text as I present it on this screen, but it just continues in the Midrash with these next paragraphs. And as I said at the beginning, we're not sure when the first Honi HaMe'agel we studied is living. There is an ambiguity in the Aramaic of this Midrash that makes it really confusing. So this next line starts, Honi HaMe'agel was the grandson of Honi HaMe'agel. Now we're telling a story about Honi HaMe'agel, and we don't know if the story we just were telling is of the grandfather or of the grandson, and the one that we're about to read is of the grandfather or the grandson. But it's a different Honi HaMe'agel that is in some relationship with the first Honi HaMe'agel that we studied. I'm going to argue that I think it makes more sense to read this new Honi HaMe'agel as the grandson, just for the simple reason that he's not asking the question, can a person really sleep and dream for 70 years? Whereas the first one was asking the question, and I think if his grandfather had done so, maybe he would know that and not be so surprised by it. But there's ambiguities about it. So this Honi HaMe'agel now has his own encounter with sleeping and dreaming. So would someone else like to read, or Sabina, you could keep reading?
I'm happy to keep reading. Is anyone else inspired to read? All right. Honi HaMe'agel was the grandson of Honi HaMe'agel, Hagal. Near the time of the destruction of the temple, he went out to a mountain after his workers. While he was sitting there, rain came down. He entered a cave and slumbered, and his sleep endured for 70 years, until the temple was destroyed and rebuilt. In the end, he awoke from his sleep and saw a world transformed. He saw that places that had been olive orchards had become vineyards. Places that had been vineyards had become fields of vegetable seeds. He ascended to the city of Jerusalem and said to them, "What's the word in the world?" They said to him, "And who are you?" He said, "I am Honi HaMe'agel." They said, "We heard that when Honi would enter the temple courtyard, it would light up." He entered, and it lit up. Upon this occurrence, he recited, "When Hashem restores the fortunes of Zion, we see it as in a dream."
Thank you, Sabina. So, Anna, I don't know if you wanted to say something about this at this point. No pressure.
Sure. Something I'm meditating on is the balance that's taking place between the need to believe, right? So the call to believe, the carob tree will bear fruit. The disbelief, you are not Honi Hamagel, right? And then the unification of belief and disbelief in this last segment, which is, he awakens from the dream after 70 years, sees the world transformed, asks, what's the word in the world? And this kind of coming together, right? And so I'm really thinking about that relationship between belief and disbelief. And at what point do those two come together to create a new world?
Great. And right, the ability to just ask the questions and take in the answers. So if we go back to the first Choni Hamagel, let's look. When he first wakes up, he is not inclined, as would none of us be probably, to notice the transformation of the world. The first question he asks is, are you the man who planted this tree? He was told this carob tree is going to take 70 years to plant. I know I might not be around to see it, but he's still asking a question based on an assumption that I fell asleep for a few hours. Maybe that carob tree grew a lot faster than I was expecting. Whereas this second Choni wakes up and sees a world transformed. He immediately perceives that the world has been different than the world he fell asleep in. And let's notice he slept during this really intense time that matches the Midrash, the 70 years that the temple is destroyed and rebuilt. And in that time, things have been uprooted and things have been planted. And we should acknowledge, although if we're not an agrarian society, it might be hard to acknowledge, that it's not a value neutral uprooting and planting. Olive trees are a long-lasting species. Olive trees can last millennia. Grapevines are perennials that can produce for decades. And vegetables are annuals. So he sees that olive orchards have been transformed into vineyards, meaning there has been a big upheaval. There has been an uprooting of that which had great longevity has been replaced with that which has less longevity. And he's noticing this, he's assimilating this. I'll pause because Meryl wants to say something. Please.
Yeah, I agree with you. I was going to make that comment about olive trees being replaced by vineyards, etc. But the other thing that I was struck by was the last line, using when Hashem restores the fortune of Zion, we see it as in a dream. It feels like he doesn't even know for sure if he's awake. And
Great.
that kind of hit me like a ton of bricks.
Do you want to say more about that?
Well, he's not really sure what's real. He's not grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So I would want this to continue on, I want to know more what happens next, because this is exactly how we're feeling right now.
Great. Yes.
And I don't mean with just COVID. I mean with the climate change more even than COVID.
Right. That just how do we ground ourselves in a shifting, bewildering reality?
Yeah.
Actually, this is Oriana. I'm actually inspired by it in terms of the regenerative nature of Earth, and that is why we may see certain things as destruction. Had I been alive watching the olive orchards be decimated or something else, I would have been concerned that would be the total end. But it doesn't feel like the total end. There's something in this that feels very hopeful to me, and that we can trust that there is a greater energy power source that allows I will be what I will be kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I found that quite inspiring. I'm not quite sure, however, what that question, what's the word in the world mean?
Okay. Great. Mara or Justine, you wanted to say something?
So this is Maram, and what jumps out at me is this is a text that's a lot about temporality. So the first Choni Hamagal measures time in terms of his own lifetime. So the span of one human life. And that's not the way the text is working, that we're supposed to be thinking of cyclical time, I think. So the second Choni Hamagal is not thinking, so the person planting the tree is not thinking about it in terms of his own lifetime. He's thinking about the generations. The second Choni Hamagal recognizes that time has moved on, but like Oriana just said, it's regenerative. And he's recognized when he goes into the temple, even though it's been destroyed at that point, it still lights up. So there is some miracle going on. Dream time is another form of time that is not bound to the reality of one person. It's this other kind of time space that is the space of miracles too, and of being able to recognize things, the dream of planting for future generations. So I think it's a text that's asking us to get beyond being individuals and reframe our understanding of our place in the world as about cyclical time and the generations.
Absolutely.
Can I say something too? I think also to that end, like the number 70 is, right, it's not a natural cycle number in nature, but it's like a created cycle in our Jewish tradition of like completeness, right? Like 7, on Shabbat, right after 6 days, and then we rest. And so there's also something about the number 70 faces to the Torah. Like there's so many different, different 70s that are seen as really sacred. And so maybe there's something about this 70 years that sort of can potentially, if seen in the right way, create a complete and not a return necessarily, although maybe return as tshuva return, but almost a paradigm shift. And if seen with an openness can bring light.
Amen. Yes. And I would add, there's one other thing about, what are the 70s? The 70s are the 70 years are the amount of time Choni sleeps, but they are the amount of time it takes a carob tree to grow and the amount of time of destruction. And so for a text that is for an exile people being right. So this story is set in the time of the return from exile, but it is a story that is written and read by a people in exile. I find there to be something very profound. I'm going to try to put words to it about this juxtaposition of 70 years from planting to harvest and 70 years from destruction to return. And at the time that most Jews are in the world, right, are studying this text throughout history, we don't have the option easily of return. I mean, we do today, but like for most of Jewish history, we don't have the option of easy return to Zion, but we do still have the option of planting seeds. And so to me, one reason I was looking for a lot of different texts when Anna invited me to create a text study in conjunction with her seed prayer, one reason that I was so enamored of this one is that juxtaposition of like, what does it mean as an exile people to still have a relationship with seeds, with planting, with saying, like we have these long-term cycles that are about bigger than us. And ideally, it's very easy for a culture of people rooted to a land to understand our relationship to the land and to future generations in really long cycles that are bigger than us. But as an exile people, how are we going to do that? And the importance of really like noticing the power of a seed, even if we're not going to be able to guarantee not only that we'll be there to see them flourish, but that our descendants might even be in the same place where we plant those seeds for them to flourish. That there's still a mandate for us to plant for a future that someone will see. Okay, I see a lot of chat. I see a lot of hand raising, so I'll pause.
Oh, sorry. Can I say something? I raised my hand, but then I took it down because I didn't know if you'd see it.
Please, yes.
Okay. So a question, and then also something I want to contribute. During Yom Kippur, my community sponsored Miriam Kaba speaking about PIC abolition prison industrial complex abolition and that movement. And she said that part of that movement is living in the future and also in the present at the same time, is to act in a way now, in the way that you would want to see when those systems don't exist. So that resonated with what we were just talking about. And then also the question that I had is about this 7 generations. My cousin, who has worked a lot with the Lakota Nation in, I think it's North or South Dakota, he just released a song, and in it, it's part of an interview with someone in that community, and there's this 7 generations that keeps repeating, and I haven't had a chance to speak with him about that, but I'm wondering if, because we also have 70 years in our Jewish tradition as being something that is really that repeats a lot, the number 7, if we can answer that question of this, is there a link to the 7 generations, or what does that mean in Native American culture? Is it just Lakota, or are there more communities and tribes that also have that idea?
Anna, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that directly. So I want to urge us to think about the fact that within the territory of the United States, there are at least 565 federally recognized tribes, each with their own culture and their own histories, right? And then thinking about that there are also many other tribes that are not federally recognized because of US federal policies and changes, right? Like in Oregon, we had termination, and the tribes that were existing before 1959 suddenly weren't. And then across the Americas, we have over 2,000 Native tribes, right? So there are points of connection that have emerged a lot because of relationships that have been established between different tribal communities. I'm from the Caribbean. I'm Caribbean Arawak, right, from the Caribbean. And, you know, my tribal people have their own lineage and their own histories and their own mythologies and their own creation stories. And then there are things that bring us in common with other peoples, right? So one is the belief that America is one continent, not that it's 2, right, or 3, it's one continent. Another one is the idea that the continent is a turtle, right? And then a third idea that brings many of us together, not all tribes, but many tribes, and the Lakota people are currently located in what today is known as South Dakota. You know, they're one tribe of many tribes, but one thing that does bring many tribes together is this idea of the 7 generations. And the 7 generations is really profound and really tied into the feminine. So if I think about the fact that as a woman, I was already existing in my grandmother's womb, in her egg, right? Her ova, like this is, I'm gonna just get really technical for a minute, right? So our grandmothers had the ova that, right, when they became pregnant with our mothers, our mothers were born with all the ova that they were going to have over the course of their lifetime, which means that we already existed in our grandmother's womb. And if I were to have a child who had a uterus, and you know, and they were to have a child, that the child of my child would have existed in my womb, right? And so the idea of the 7th generation is that generation that is the new, that is the transformation across the generations, right? So that 7th generation, the 2 generations behind me, the 2 generations after me, right? That's 5 of us. There's 1 generation right before that and 1 generation right after that represent the period of transformation, right? When change happens on earth, when change happens in our societies, when change happens among our people. And so if we think about that in terms of lifetimes, it could be 70 years. We could have 3 generations in a 70-year time period. We could have 4 generations, we could have 2, right? You know, there's a great variation, but the 7 generations represents the how long it takes for Earth and society and people to transform, right? And for that feminine principle of that's rooted in the uterus and in the ova in a very technical way, for that to
be new, right? For that to emerge from a new body, a new being. If people have questions about that, I'm happy to answer any of those questions, but that's where the idea of the 7 generations comes from. And it's a principle that ties many communities together, many tribes together, many peoples together, in this understanding that change is never going to be in our lifetime. It's always going to be across 7 generations, and that we are the guardians of the earth for our children, right? So we have it on loan from them. It's not the other way around. We have a responsibility to ensure that we are taking care of it for them. And, you know, we're just, so it's a different, in that sense, like we're thinking about the fact that time is moving differently, right? Because it's moving through the feminine. And I'm struck with, you know, this passage also, like the kind of masculine qualities of it, right? And the ways that the seed exists outside of Honi Hamagal, and thinking about that in contrast to the native concept of the seed living inside. So I hope that answered folks' questions.
Thanks, Anna. And I know we're coming to an end of our time. Ariella wanted to say something, and then Maram, and then I think we'll probably move towards close. So Ariella, would you?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I wanted to continue in this this vein of indigeneity. And I live in the Bay Area, which is Ohlone land, a tribe that was many tribes and was called Ohlone and is not recognized by the federal government. Karina Gold, who is a Ohlone activist, created this amazing documentary called Beyond Recognition, where she talks about what it means to what we as Jews would call be in exile in your own land. And I was just really moved in this text with this idea of being beyond recognition, of being from somewhere, but not either being recognized or recognizing what is around you. And that dissonance is something that comes up in this text in both of these stories of like, is this a dream? Is this real? And how quickly that has happened in many places in the US. But, and to end, that the important characters in the story aren't just people, it's also the natural world. So what I see in the first Choni is that this cliff magically forms, and it suggests to me that the second Choni is maybe in the same place where he dropped into, right? And so that even though socially there are these cycles of destruction and recreation and of generations, the natural world, and especially the plants that are not agricultural, right, that seed themselves, or that are elements that are more stable, like the rocks and the mountains, they have the power to continue the cultural story with us and for us, despite what happens. So I just wanted to bring it back to how the land is also a character and has a huge power to be recognizable and to bring us back to something that we thought we had shifted so much. But you know, this carob tree and the rocks are this character that somehow, and the seeds, right, are a way for us to continue connection and traditions that we might not even fully understand anymore in the same way. So there is power in the natural world in continuing legacies and cultures that sometimes might feel unrecognizable to us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, beautiful. And I'm thinking also particularly those of us living on the West Coast had a lot of fire swept through and very quickly changing the recognizability of the land. I was talking to a congregant yesterday who was saying that she drove up the Mackenzie River. There's been a huge fire swept through the Mackenzie River Basin, and the human-made landmarks are mostly gone, and the landmarks are much more prominent now for orienting her to where she is. And so perhaps as we begin to figure out how we navigate, there's now a word for it, the solastalgia, the nostalgia for a place that is still there, and we are still there, but the place is changing. We recognize the endurance of the land even as our marks on the land cause it to change. Okay, comment from Maram, and then I think Anna and I will wrap this up.
It's actually Justine. Hi. So I'm really thinking about both things that I feel like Anna has said. One at the very beginning, and both of these kind of relate to what it means to be a diasporic community and thinking about seeds and what gets planted. And that I feel like at the beginning, something Anna said was that it's not even necessarily physical seeds, but it can be seeds of values. It can be seeds of ideas about justice, and that we might not actually experience the cultural transformation or societal transformation in our lifetimes, but doing the work of planting those seeds is of tremendous value to our human landscape. And the other piece was what you just said, Anna, which was, I think, so profound, about the seeds that we carry within ourselves and what that means as a people of the diaspora, and that we continue to generate and plant, and that it's not totally place specific, but that we have a relationship and a commitment that we need to make to the entire human family, to the world, to what we offer in terms of that transformation and what we carry within ourselves. Because I think that this tension around what it means to be in the diaspora kind of gives us this responsibility, and I think that we've taken on this responsibility as a people of bringing perspective and influence to our broader communities. So even though I'm a landscape architect and I'm very place specific, those are really profoundly moving concepts to me. And thank you, Anna, for bringing so much layering and complexity and humanity to this conversation, and for the work that you've done around physical seeds and idea seeds and the ways that you've informed us. Thank you.
Anna, you're still muted.
Yes. Thank you, Justine, for those moving words. In closing, I wanted to share some images from and now we're part of this conversation, right? And for me, it's deeply moving to think about Indigenous communities that are rooted in the Americas, right? Indigenous communities of the Americas that are rooted, Afro-descendant communities, diasporic communities that are also not rooted in their place of origin, but have found new places and ways to be in the Americas, and Jewish community that has found, and Jewish peoples have found ways to be in many, many places across the Americas. And I just wanted to share some images with folks. Might I be able to screen share as we close?
Yes,
I think
we just have to make you host, which we should have done sooner, but we can do. Oh, Jody, I think you need to make Anna co-host. There you go.
This is my way of closing, is to share with you some of the images and some of the ways in which we'll be connected with other communities as a result of our conversation today. Okay, so everybody can see, this is the nativelands.ca, right? They have this project of trying to map native lands, and we can see where Eugene is here, right? In here. These are all the different communities from Hawaii to the Caribbean and across the Americas, the Native communities that participated in the prayer on July 5th. And, thinking about the corn seed, here we have about 7 different kinds of corn seeds, right? And corn seeds are original to what today is known as Mexico, and are all across the Americas. And so we think about the corn seed. The corn seed is often a metaphor for humans in Native communities, the idea that we are the corn. Here we have some beautiful seeds. and just thinking about, you know, all the different seeds. This is from the Caribbean. Oops. This is in Texas. This is another prayer that happened in the Texas-Mexico border. These are all seed offerings. And what's amazing about this is that there are coyotes and deer that live on this land, and none of them, and birds, and none of them touch the seeds for a whole week. These are some folks who came together in the Southern Cone in what is known as South America. And, you know, they had their corn. These are folks in Northern Mexico who had offerings of seeds that they distributed to their community. And then this is in Central Mexico. They did at night, they planted a circle and they brought seeds together and they made patterns and then offered those seeds to the water the next day. This is also in the Caribbean where people brought together different elements, right? This is in Oregon, an Afro-diasporic community that took fruit and seeds and flowers to the ocean. This is in Cuba, where food is scarce, and people brought the seeds together and prepared them as food and prepared them for planting and shared them. These are some flowers offered to a spring. And so I just wanted to share some of those images and just, you know, recognize that we all have different ways of thinking about seeds and of building relationship with seeds. And I guess the charge that I would like to ask us all to think about is, what is our relationship to seeds, and how can we play a role in protecting seeds for the next 70 years or the next 7 generations, so that our food sources, so that our life sources, so that the experiences of this moment might inform the future in a beautiful and positive and life-giving way. Thank you, Ruhi. This has been an honor. Thank you so much.
It's been an honor for me as well, and I think for all of us. Thank you all for joining. I hope that we all are the seed and disperse our seeds, and and find something that we can plant in honor of this experience together. So I wish you all Moadim L'Simcha, a beautiful rest of this Chag Sukkot. If you want a very different seed-related ritual and you're here with us, we are going to be gathering in the sukkah and the tent outside of Temple Beth Israel tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for Hoshana Rabbah prayers, where we're literally like shaking willow branches and trying to bring down the blessings. It's not too late to sign up to be there in person. And I wish blessings for all of us, and this blessing of this long view, especially in these next few months that will probably be so trying and frightening for many of us. Let's remember that we are connected and that we are part of cycles of 7 generations and beyond.